production. You look at the whites, you look at the inner green there. That inner green is white, and it's degrees. The inner green on the right from my side is blacks. And it's so thin that it can't, that green area cannot support the economic growth of South Africa at all. We are leaning on a very, very poor read. And that green amongst whites suggests to us that they are like South Korea, where degrees, qualifications are highest in the world, and whites in South Africa are equal to those Koreans, and blacks are something somewhere else, such as South Africa. Now, in absolute numbers, that's the read we rely on. And those absolute numbers cannot carry this economy. So if we don't address the question of education in the best ways, we are not going to go anywhere. Now, when we asked population, they said education is priority number 15. The first priority is what the politicians teach, that they will give you water, will give you sanitation, will give you all these things, and nothing about the education. And even in the height of Fifth Must Fall, politicians were dividing that movement of students. Now, so what is the portrait of the growth accounting framework in terms of jobs, black women? All directions are going southwards. In terms of participation rate, employment rate, job creation, gainfully employed, all those pointers are pointing south. And young dependency rate and adult dependency rate is going up. Now, what about ownership of black women? We know what happened in Natal. Well, what do? We borrow from South Africa. Is one of the only countries in the developing world that has large pensions. Yet we use the lower part, the high-risk emerging market borrowing, instead of borrowing from our own pensions. The developed world borrows from the pensions and it's low risk. And we borrow from the IMF and others. And that's what causes, amongst others, a lot of problems for us. That's what we have done with the rail system. There's no station at Kliptown, let alone the rail line. That's what the lawlessness occurred in Natal, load shedding at Eskom. And they say, well, load shedding level 2 is better than load shedding level 8. They are all the same. There's no linearity in load shedding. It is exponential. So what the government is doing is actually triggering the tragedy of both the commons and the ruling class. Both are actually destroyed, instead of actually optimizing the system for inclusivity. The unemployment rates, I mean, this is the most hurting part. You see, these are the employed in 2008. They were up to here in the age group 25 to 34. These are the employed 15 to 24. These are the employed by age group. But by 2020, those 15 to 24 had lost their absolute number, in absolute numbers, their employment. 1 million less amongst the 15 to 24 were employed in 2020 compared to 2008. 500,000 less were employed in the 25 to 34 in 2020 compared to 2008. Now tell me whether there is a youth program that actually supports this. The story is very disturbing. Yet the president says we have employed so many amongst the youth. The figures don't support that. Who gives the president the numbers? The statistician general presents the numbers. Who are the bureaucrats who then advise the president on this for him to make this kind of statement? Because it's wrong. Well, poverty is the biggest driver of unemployment is the biggest driver of poverty. Between 2001 to 2006, poverty to 2011, poverty grew by 7 percentage points. Between 2006 and 2016, between 2011 and 2016, poverty grew by 12 percentage points. It's serious acceleration. It is a serious acceleration. Combine that with the second layer there, which is years of schooling. On the years of schooling, yes, there has been some progress, but it is too small, too little, too late. When you combine years of schooling by 2016 and the poverty level in 2016, you get South Africans' problem explained by 63% of South African problems are explained by that levels of poverty. You can see that. That 52 plus this 11 come to 63%. These housing and all these things are important, but they are not the most important. They are not changing. They contribute very little in terms of progress. Yet the politicians, when they go on stage, they talk about those, but not about education. So for the youth, it's been worse. Because amongst the youth, that's 35 plus, my eyes are going, 35 plus 36 plus 31 becomes 63. The problems of the youth plus another 15. 75% of the problems of the youth are about their level of lack of education, their level, nobody waking at home, and being not in school or in employment. That is the biggest problem. What do we tell the youth? While multidimensional poverty decreased between 2001 and 2011, particularly from Singa, it made the greatest progress in the SABC. And then it proceeded to make even better progress, but there are reversals that we see between that time and 2016. If we think about the economy, for 24 quarters, the fixed capital formation grew only by 1 point, or didn't grow at all. Out of those 24 quarters, 16 were negative. And gross fixed capital formation is what makes the country move. There isn't any. Then we go to GDP, the same story, quarter on quarter. Of course, COVID came. Now, if we conclude on this portrait of growth accounting framework, the entire framework is facing downwards. So I'm talking about what we already know. Now, we have to talk about trade. I mean, trade and SMMEs. 22% of the SMEs in the 9.9 trillion turnover, or the small businesses contribute 22% in the 9.9 trillion turnover. And yet, they don't have banking accounts. 97% of the SMEs don't have a bank, both in 2013 and 2017. They don't get credit. The Mashonistas even do better. They borrow from friends and fools, family, friends and fools, and not banks. So what is our development agenda? There is none. And of course, South Africa has a very high price level index and high level of concentration if you compare it from specialized shops in Egypt and other places in Nigeria. When you look at where people buy across the country, or rather the world, South Africa lost its preeminent position to Egypt and as well as to Nigeria. Not because it was not capable to do that, but we had the wrong politics in the country. And this is what we lost, our advantage that we had over Nigeria and Egypt. And then, of course, added to that, we have a high price level index, which means that imports are more expensive for us, or things are more expensive for us compared to Egypt. This is prices in Egypt. In Egypt, this is the prices. These are the prices in Nigeria, and those are the prices in South Africa. They are much higher than our competitors, our big economies. So we cannot compete. So Al-Mazrui says the African produces what he does not consume and consumes what he does not produce. The change, therefore, is about what was impossible becoming the inevitable. Now, for fixed capital formation or for construction, you need to buy plant material. But what we are seeing here in plant material is that the cost of plant material, that 131, is the highest for sub-Saharan Africa. So even if you buy abroad, you buy at high cost. So this is how purchases are made at outlets. You see that in South Africa, it is in the large malls and the private businesses. And the private businesses are owned by whites, and the large malls are owned by whites. That leaves very little for blacks. In the rest of the continent, the distribution is much better. So What have we done? I mean, business people yourselves demand high salaries. And the terms of trade are very much miserizing. If you want to read about this, you read Jagdish Bhagwati on miserizing growth. South Africa is going through that miserizing growth. So, what do we have to say? We had plans. Those things don't look like plans to me. The only plan, something that mattered like a plan, that would generate a plan, was the RDP. The rest have just been, and then it devolved into ASGISA and so on. But the New Dawn, the 14-point plan, the 9-point plan, call them anything. They are just a litany list, a list of things that don't make sense. There's nothing that, I mean, if you think about the State of the Nation address and the address by the Minister of Finance, they said nothing about poverty, nothing about inequality. We modeled this and said, what does this all mean? It means the growth rate for South Africa will be less than 3%. And with less than 3% growth, you cannot lift South Africa out of problems. Fortunately, you as business people approached government and said, oh, we are sure that if you combine with us, Mr. President, we can grow the economy to 8 trillion rands. You said you can drop the unemployment rate. You said but the government didn't take your offer. Not that I believe what you said, not at all, because you didn't model this thing. You just put a list of things that you thought could be done. But you've got to model these things. It has to have science in it. But the fact that we could work towards a target should have been grabbed with both hands by government, so that we can start discussing meaningfully as a country. We modeled this under different scenarios, and we see that what we are saying is more like ESCOM announces level 4 load sharing. So if we look at the competitiveness route, we find that all these routes are blocked for South Africa. So what is the conclusion of the statement? That about this mischief, that we have actually, by own report by government, we said that social indicators are poor, everything is, and from Indlamete scenarios, South Africa is actually moving towards a Gwara state. And you can see from 2019 to 2021, the Gwara scenario is the most prominent. So this is the economy we have. No industrialization. And then you look at this man who says he deserves the 300 million. And then you look at Taban, who saves lives, who came from Sudan. He's the preeminent pulmonologist in South Africa. He's a Sudanese. He's the first man on earth to use flexible fiber optic bronchoscopy. The first person on earth. If he was Chris Barnard, he would have been Chris Barnard, the world would have known. But we have made the world not to know about the discovery of this man who works with a lot of passion and empathy. So, South Africa, low economic growth, high unemployment, high poverty, high inequality. So how do we eliminate this tragedy? We really need to look at the conflict that arises, and my eyes are not looking that well, between labor and capital, between government and capital, between government and society, and capital and society. Multidimensional poverty helps you to resolve these problems. And these problems actually can be resolved in the prosumer economy, where we are technologically enabled. And technology is non-rival. It enables production of assets to be non-rival. When I have this, you cannot have it. But under technology, I can have it and you have it as well. And therefore, the demand pushes the price down. So it's an economy of abundance. And that's what we have to look at. And multidimensional poverty indices enable us to get towards that. And Amartya says human lives are battered and diminished in all kinds of different ways. And the first task is to understand the multidimensionality of those. So multidimensional poverty measures complement monetary policy, and they look at the things that are tangible, nutrition, schooling, and so on. When you look at this and you convene your cabinet will talk to these things rather than talking to the budgets, but talking to this and saying we are going to resolve this. And then, of course, allocate budgets to solve them. So we don't use multidimensional poverty even when that data is there in South Africa. Parliament doesn't hold the bureaucracy to using this. So in Costa Rica, the president used multidimensional poverty to reduce poverty. In fact, he went further to actually in Colombia, the settlement between the FARC under Santos was based on multidimensional poverty. It was a social contract that delivered real goods to those who were in conflict. It was a difficult thing, but it was a real struggle. But when you say farmers should donate land, which was the basis of struggle, surely that's an empty hope. So now the multidimensional poverty, I work at Oxford, I'm a research associate. We are now looking at how business uses multidimensional poverty of their employees to derive the kind of empathy that is necessary, not to reserve 300 million when your employees, miners, don't get anything. So what is happening there is people who work are burdened with debt, but they have other forms of deprivations and discrimination. And we need to look into those in order to resolve the perennial problems. And here, many other institutions have bought into this. Companies in Latin America are buying into this. I'm sure South Africa companies will buy into this. I spoke to the JSE and said, this is the way we have to go if we have to resolve the problems of South Africa. Because we cannot have a blunt relationship between capital and government. We need a relationship that is facilitated by the employees. And this is global MPI, and here you know that this ESGs actually count. Musk was reacting to this when his stocks lost 7.5% because he was failing on the ESG. If we focus on the ESG, business will be disciplined. So the ESG helps us to develop things that we have not done before. But South Africa, there's no reason why we don't use our pensions assets, because we have them galore. And we go instead and borrow from the IMF and others. There's no reason to do that. But there's reason to that because the government is corrupt and the private sector is corrupt. So my pension will be eaten up before I see it. So we need to fix those politics because of that corruption. So what do we think we should be doing? We are in a scenario of Gwara Gwara, a country miserizing growth, and we see a lot of problems. We have the trickle-down effect, but that's not going to go far. But I think it is possible to go into Naila Walk. This is what we presented to government as business. And you said this GDP will grow to $550 billion, which is 8 trillion rands. You didn't say when it will be. But when we modeled the economy, not with your data, but with the data, we came up with a 6-pillar policy. And this 6-pillar policy looks at the macroeconomic policy, social policy, micro, trade and industry, privatization, provincial. And if we are to do this with the data that we have provided, it is quite possible that South Africa can actually win. And if we look at this staircase model, we actually we can reach a growth of about 5%. This is this business as usual, 0.7. And if we look at what is being put out in the micro reforms, the economic recovery plan talks a lot to micro, it will bring only 0.27%. If you look at trade and industry, it will only bring 0.38 percentage points rather. And what will really lead to change is the macro reforms, credit extension, and all those things that the Reserve Bank we have been talking to. And of course, if we look at social policy, it doesn't grow the economy a lot, but it creates conditions for social cohesion. And if we look at private support, and of course, we can actually grow at 5.7% as a country. These are the things that we have to do, which are the two policies around tools of foresight and multidimensional poverty indications. Asian Chinese tell us that the ever-normal granary is the most important. And of course, what we need to remember is what Joel Nechitenje says. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pali Lehohla, for that comprehensive analysis.